Okay, it's 11 o'clock. Today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and this is the first of three presentations we'll be doing online today in celebration of that event. We also have a bunch of other things going on. If you visit the deque.com website, there's a blog posting that you can see all the things we're doing for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or if you visit the Global Accessibility Awareness Day homepage, you'll see the Deque events listed there under the online events. Today I'm talking about modern accessible navigation, and let's get started. So what is navigation for? That's the first question. When a lot of people think of navigation, they think of getting around the site. They may think of getting around the page, but really, if you abstract it up, it's the following 7 things. It's to allow users to find the things they want, to allow users to see where they are, to allow users to see what options they have on that page, and help them find their way around that page. Those are kind of from the user perspective, the things that navigation helps them with. From the business perspective, or from the website perspective, it's really to get the customers to see the stuff that they want them to see the offers they want them to see, the products they want them to see, etc. It's to impact their SEO in a positive way, and ultimately to drive revenue. So there may at times be some competing demands there between what the user wants and what the business wants, and you have to try to reconcile those in some way. So there's different types of navigation. There's navigation that leads from page to page on a site, and we call that site-wide navigation. And what that does is it aids in the discovery, it aids in helping you determine where you are on the page, determine your location, those sorts of things. There's in-page navigation, so that's how you may get from the header to the main content, and maybe how you get from the main content to the side navigation. In something like a single page ad, like an editor, it may be how you get from editing the content to getting to the list of files that are in your project, or whatever the case may be. And then there's workflow navigation, which could be from page to page or in a single page application, but it's really walking you through steps in some kind of workflow, either a task-based workflow, a transaction workflow. Think of something along the lines of a checkout, a workflow that you might be pretty familiar with. So those are the types of navigation that we're talking about. Let's talk, before we start talking about modern navigation, let's talk about a little bit of where we've come from, because that kind of impacts where we are today and where we're going. And so this is, like any history, a little bit subjective. It's my view of the important things that have happened in the past almost 20 years that have really driven us to the point that we are today. Some of the important milestones there are things like the Tao of web design, which started really getting us out of thinking about taking paper-based information layouts and just putting them on the web, and thinking in terms of creating websites and web applications that were first and foremost designed for the web, with the web and that medium in mind, and also taking accessibility into account. The first demonstration of responsive web design concepts was in 2004. Around about that time, things like two-level tabs and L-shaped navigation and landing pages were first really becoming used widely. A big milestone was in 2006 when John Riesig released the first version of jQuery, and that really allowed people to create cross-platform dynamic applications with a relatively acceptable level of effort. And that really started to open up possibilities for normal web designers and web developers to think outside of the static pages and links between pages. The iPhone was released in 2007, and mega menus and mega footers really started coming to their own in 2008, around about there. Around about the same time, you started to see the impact of the iPhone on websites. So you started to see websites designed specifically for mobile appear, and you started to see things like redirects from the desktop version of the website to the mobile version of the website based on user agent and things like that. 2010, fluid grids started becoming popular with Twitter Bootstrap version 1, Twitter Bootstrap version 2 in 2012, And that's also around about the time when people started talking about developing first for mobile. So you started hearing about mobile first, but Twitter Bootstrap version 3 came out in 2013, and really last year is when responsive web design really became mainstream, and the combination of designing first for mobile and responsive web design started to really take off. And so if you take a look at where that's got us, let's take a look at some examples of what's kind of the modern websites look like today. You'll see that these things have had a big effect on the sites that you can see out there today. And talking about navigation when you're not talking about it in the context of design is kind of useless, because the two really fit together really well. So let's take a look at a very popular site, Squarespace, where you can host your own websites. Up there you'll see a couple of things that are really ubiquitous today in new modern websites. That is, you'll see in contrast to say 5 or 8 years ago, where you'd often see margins on the side that weren't being used, and kind of a 960 grid in the middle where the content was. You'll see that the full width of the site is being used across the browser. And as you scroll down, you'll see nice animations. You'll see very good-looking, aesthetically pleasing images and fonts. You'll see, parts of the page scrolling as you scroll down, where other parts stay static or look static. And so you'll see a lot of this very kind of appealing, visually appealing stuff going on the page. Let's go back and take a look at one of the other sites. If you take this card site, for example, once again, it's an example of another website development tool. You also see a similar thing, but with some unique twists on it. If I click that down arrow, then I get to something that looks very much like what we saw on Squarespace, just implemented differently. As I scroll, it kind of pages and gives me new pieces of code that I can then explore by clicking on some of the interactive elements on the page. And so once again, it's also taking up the entire page, and has some media on it that's also plays automatically. Let's go and look at a third example of something modern. Let's look at something that's kind of product-centric. I click on this link over here. It takes me to my.djo.fr, which is a product-based site. So it's a single product in this company. It takes a little bit of a while to load. But once it's loaded, I see once again the full page being taken up by the content, no margins anywhere. I see very dynamic content where if I use my mouse to pan across the page, it rotates the product. I can see information about the product, which I can interact with to change the look of what's being displayed in front of me, and I can ultimately use navigation at the bottom to order the product as well. If I look at some of the more unique things on this, let's look at Personal Brand Institute. This is another example of a very modern site. Once again, full content being taken up, full width of the page being taken by content. I have some music playing because I can. As I mouse over the content, little interactive elements appear that I can use to navigate around the content. This just happens to be in Polish. So once again, very visual appealing, interactive, and rich content on the site. And finally, I'm going to show you this QO Plus site, which is really very similar to Squarespace. Once again, full length, full width content. As I scroll down on the page, the content moves vertically. As I continue scrolling, it does something a little different. It starts moving horizontally across. And I continue. I'm scrolling. Continue to scroll down. You can see if you can see my screen, you can see the scroll bar on the right-hand side moving down. But the content's actually moving horizontally across the screen. So interesting, interactive, very visually appealing ways of allowing me to discover the content on this page. At all points, there are things I can interact with to jump off into the site to learn more about the product. A very interesting way of showing me the different color options for these headphones. So as I scroll down, there's like a filter that gets applied on top of the product to show me the different color options. Kind of interesting. You get to the bottom of the color options, and there's a call to action to ask me to do subscribe to the newsletter, interact with the product, etc. So these are all examples of kind of modern, more modern websites, and the things that designers are trying to do to take advantage of the capabilities that they have in the browsers, but also the reason that that they're using the full width of the screen. There's two reasons for it. First of all, it's there. Why not use it? It's really fulfilling the promise of trying to design user interfaces to fit the medium rather than trying to design things coming from another medium like paper. But also, it's also a lot easier to deal with some of the things that are really driving us today in 2015 in our designs, and those are you making the content the best content and the best application interaction for regardless of what device you're on. So because the content takes up the full width of the screen, it's easy to make it responsive and look good on a television-sized screen, as well as look good on a mobile phone, iPhone 6 or iPhone 5 size screen. And so both of those things, I'm not sure which of those came first, but both of those things are playing into the reason that all the designs that you see today are kind of full-page rich designs, and they change then as you responsively change the size of your screen. You'll see those designs scale down or scale up to the appropriate screen width. And so that's one of the things that's really driving a lot of the designs that you see on websites, and a lot of reasons for the choices in the navigation metaphors that they're using. Another big driver is data, and in particular data in terms of analytics. That's really driving companies to analyze what people are interested in, where they're going to, what parts of the user interface are working for them. But also, whereas say 2, 3, 4 years ago, analytics was starting to be used to really understand what people wanted and what they were using, now it's being used to test what different design or interaction options work better. So a lot of A/B testing is now starting to enter into the way retailers and online applications think about their development process. So they don't only develop one option, they may develop 2 or 3 different options, try to figure out which one of those works best, and then the one that works best lives longer. And so data in this and analytics in this sense are driving a lot of what gets done on the web. And then there's some technology trends that are also driving that. So we talked about Twitter Bootstrap and the effect that that's had on a lot of these websites, also making it easy to do some of the responsive stuff. But there's also things like Node.js, React, and Angular that are making it a lot easier to make more interactive, even much more interactive than jQuery allowed, applications that scale better, that are more maintainable as those applications get bigger, and that react better to dynamic updates. Things like Angular can do that, and React. So okay, so we've looked at kind of the context in which navigation is getting created today and the trends that are driving it. So how do users navigate? How do they navigate sites and applications? Well, let's look, for example, at sighted users. So what you see on the right-hand side is an image of an image, a heat map, something that's used in UX design to try to determine what pieces of the design are working and what pieces aren't. And it shows you where the user's eyes go as they scan a particular page or application. And so sighted users use their eyes to scan the page. They may pan with the mouse if the page is bigger than that. They may scroll if the page is longer than the information. And of course, they're going to use the mouse to click if they can use the mouse to click to interact with the page and move to other pages, etc. So those are the things, the techniques and the strategies that users use to get around websites when they interact with them if they're sighted. So what do the designers use to drive their interactions to where they want them to go, where they think they need to go? The designers use visual cues, things like space. Space can either create a focus on something, or it can create borders between things to create groupings. And so space, and things like dark and light. If you're doing it accessibly, you'll be using dark and light, and not only a particular color to indicate importance, to indicate grouping, and to differentiate things from each other. And then they use clues like size. So importance of information will be indicated by the size of the font, or perhaps the size of the image that is there. And so those are just some of the visual cues that designers will use to try to get you, the users, to go and look at the content and interact with the content in the way that they want them to. So let's move now to do a quick screen reader demo, because a lot of people are not familiar with the analogous things that a blind user, for example, might do if they want to navigate around a page. So I'm going to go to VoiceOver over here, and I'm going to go to a particular site. Founder Center, Commonwealth, Autism, and I'm going to turn on the screen reader, okay, using okay. So now right. So now what you'll first notice, if you've never used VoiceOver, I'm on VoiceOver here, is you'll notice that it'll actually show you, if you're a sighted user, the stuff that's been read out to the screen reader user through the speakers. And so as I navigate around here, you'll be able to follow along just by reading the stuff that's in the bottom over there. I will also verbalize that so people who are blind can follow along. But the first thing you'll notice is when you load the page, it'll announce a bunch of content about the page. So it'll say, helping children reach their full potential. The Founder Center of Commonwealth Autism page has 55 links, 9 headings, 5 form controls, 5 landmarks, and 18 images. So that's a lot of information that a blind user can use to determine what's going on this page if they've never visited it before. And it's very useful, because one of the things, one of the strategies the blind user can use to navigate around is to do that by the structure. So by pressing Control Option U in VoiceOver, I can get VoiceOver to show me and read out to me the list of things that are on the page. So as you can see, I've got it configured here. The last time I used this, I was looking at landmarks, so it brings up the thing I was looking at the last time. And so it's showing me the landmarks, it's showing me the banner landmark, the search landmark, and as I navigate with my mouse, with my keyboard to those, it'll actually highlight those on the screen so I can see what they are. So here you can see the search box is highlighted when I go into the search landmark, the navigation is highlighted when I go into the navigation landmark, the main content and content information, etc. Just by pressing the return key, I can navigate directly to that. But I can also use the arrow keys to go to the side and look at other sorts of elements that are on the page. This is a list of all the images that are on the page. And I can, if I know this page and I know what I'm looking for, I can type, and it will filter that list of images for me, so I can jump directly to the one I'm interested in. Similar things can be done with the links. So it'll show the full list of links. And once again, if I know where I want to go, I can go to the, for example, frequently asked questions, FAQ link. I can find that very quickly just by pressing FR. Headings, same thing. It'll bring up a list of headings. And this is really one of the most common strategies that's used by blind users when they first come to a page that they're not familiar with, is to just explore the structure. The heading structure, for example, the landmark structure, will tell them a lot about how they can navigate around the page. And they will look at these in the same way that a sighted user might scan around, looking at the bigger pieces of text on the page to try to find the important page. If the page is marked up semantically, they can look, a blind user can use the screen reader's capability to look at the heading structure and get a good idea and a feel for the important content of the page, and jump directly to that and perhaps start interacting with that page. Form controls, etc., etc. So that's the one way that a screen reader user can navigate around the page. The second way they can do that is just by tabbing through the page. So as I tab into the page, you'll see it gives me a skip to main content link. That's another way I can skip directly to the main content of the page if I don't want to use the landmarks. And then takes me to the first linkable image, takes me to the search button, takes me into the menu. I can then tab through all the menu items, etc., etc. And then the third and final way that on a desktop machine that I can navigate around the page is I can just use what's called DOM order, and that is the ability to just move through the page in the order that the content appears, using the appropriate keys. Now those keys will differ somewhat from screen reader to screen reader. In JAWS and NVDA, you use up and down arrows. In VoiceOver, you use a combination of control option left and right, and then the up and down arrows as well. So there are three different ways. I can either read the entire page, like with the DOM order. I can navigate by structure, or I can navigate by interactive components using the tab key. Okay, I'm going to turn off the screen reader now and go back to the presentation. Okay, so what does that mean when you look at that from a blind user perspective? Is blind users use things like structure, things like the different element types, things like content order, interactive elements, and then on a mobile device, there's also using Explore by Touch, where just by touching the screen and moving their finger around the screen reader will read out whatever's underneath the screen. So that gives them another way to navigate and find elements on the page. And we'll see later on how that can be interesting when trying to find content that is inserted dynamically into the page or pops up into the page as well. And then they would use the keyboard to interact with that. And of course on a touch screen, the equivalent of the click with the double tap, etc. So what do we do as designers now to help facilitate that navigation around the page for blind users? We do things that are analogous to what we do for visual users, in that we use semantic markup. So if something looks like a heading, we mark it up as a heading, and that way a visual user can see the big text, and a non-sighted user using a screen reader can find that through the heading navigation option that they have in their screen reader. We make sure that all the things that you interact with are focusable. So if I can click on something with a mouse or mouse over it with a mouse, then it should be tab focusable. The keyboard focus should go to that, and I should be able to interact with it using a keyboard, either return key, double tap on a touch device, or the arrow keys as appropriate. We make sure that the information is laid out in the correct order, in the most appropriate order in the DOM. And so we pay attention to where information is in relation to each other, so that the meaning and the importance of that information is conveyed correctly. And then we use things like screen overlays to make sure that that the content that gets dynamically inserted or pops up, or it needs interaction by the user, that takes up a large portion of the screen. Focus goes into it, and if it's easy for a user using Explore to touch to find that content. So those are some of the things we do. They're analogous to what we do for sighted users. Now, of course, I've given you two examples of different types of users. I've given you a fully sighted user that can use a mouse, and I've given you an example of a totally blind user that's using a screen reader. And as we know, every user is somewhere on the continuum between fully abled and totally non-abled in any given sense. And there are often a number of combinations of different disabilities that users have. So this is where the WCAG guidelines can really help us, even though we don't understand necessarily how all the different users with different assistive technologies interact with a website. Just by following the guidelines, we can make sure that there's a pretty high percentage likelihood that all the different users with different combinations of disabilities will be able to use the page. So we also always need to take into account that we're not designing for a user that's fully sighted with a mouse, or a user that's fully blind using a screen reader, or a user that's just using voice recognition. We may have users who are using combinations of that. So we may have somebody using a zoom magnifier in combination with a screen reader, or a zoom magnifier in combination with sight and a mouse. So we always need to take into account that these interactions are on a continuum and not black and white, so to speak. So with that context in mind, what are some of the specific accessibility concerns that you're going to have to face when you're thinking about navigation on your page? Now, once again, I'm highlighting the things that are more likely to be of concern. This doesn't mean that the other accessibility WCAG guidelines are not going to be important. They all are, and they're all going to appear to some degree. no matter what you're working on, whether you're working on the navigation or the content of a page or a site. But these 4 things here are of particular concern when you're thinking about navigation, both in-page navigation and page-to-page navigation, and single-page apps or multi-page apps. The first one is role, name, state, and value, and that really relates to what is the thing that I'm interacting with, what does it do, what is its current state, etc. Then there's multi-device usage. Can I use and interact with the navigation both with a keyboard and a screen reader, voice recognition, different types of assistive technology? Then there's maintaining focus, because navigation is by its nature intended to move you around either on the page or within the site. And so making sure that I maintain my focus and I can see and perceive where I am at any given point in time, that's important. So, and then there's multi-device usability. And usability is different from usage. And so even though I may be able to use something with a keyboard or with a screen magnifier, I need to make sure that proximity of information and color are not being used in particular ways, and that I'm using semantic markup to make sure that I can navigate effectively around the page. So let's take a look at some of those sites that I showed you earlier, and let's look at them from a name, role, value, state perspective. So name, role, value, state is all about what is something, what is its current, what is it called, and what is its current state. So if we think back to that card site, you'll have noticed that as I navigated up and down, on the left-hand side there were these little dots that were updating. And so what is that form of interaction? If I had tried to do it, if I'd wanted to do it, I could have used the mouse to click on those dots, and it would have navigated me to that particular part of the page. So while the navigation I'm using is scrolling up and down to get to these various different sections of this single page app, what am I really interacting with? And my answer to that question, and once again, different people may have different answers to some of these questions. Some of those are legitimate, some of those not so much. But my answer to this question is, what I'm really doing here is I'm interacting with a tabbed interface. So the little dot on the left-hand side that's filled out, that's solid white, is showing me what I'm on, what part of the which tab I'm on. The other dots that have a very bad color contrast and are most black center with a gray outline. Some of you may not be able to actually see that even if you can see. Those are the other tabs that are there for me to navigate to, but the ones that I'm not currently on. And then there's another, what actually also is a tab, a little Twitter bird. Once again, if I click on that, it'll take me to the information that's related to all the social icons and social capabilities and contact pages and stuff like that. So really what I'm interacting with here is a tab navigation. I have a bunch of tabs. One of those tabs is selected at any given point in time, and I can move between them. A second thing that I didn't show you, but it's in the list of links that are part of this presentation, was a page where if you clicked on the menu icon in the top right-hand corner, it brought up this, it filled the entire screen with what you're seeing right here. So what you can see is, a long story short, that's the name of the site. You can see a little X up in the top right. You can see a menu heading with some things like what we do, our story, our services, our clients. You can see a get in touch section with a form where you can fill out your name, email address, telephone message, and click the button. And then there's a talk to us, which is different ways of getting in touch with and subscribing to the information on that site. And even though I clicked the menu icon to get into this, what I really have is actually a mega modal. And so once again, this may have looked to me like I was clicking a menu, and to some degrees it looks a little bit like a mega menu because there's these 3 different sections, but really it's not. It's really a mega modal. So what you have to do with your navigation, as you're thinking about your navigation and how you want that to look and how you want users to interact with it, is to first of all decide what it is. And there's a rule that I like to use to make that decision, because sometimes that decision is not as clear-cut. So some people say, well, no, that's not a modal, that's really a menu. And I'm going to say, no, it's not a menu. Why do I say it's a modal? Well, it has a close button up in the top right. And second of all, the content that appears in it is not all menu content. It's not all just lists of things I can jump off to. There's actually also a form inside that modal. And so to me, what it's doing is it's acting like a modal. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Doesn't matter if I click the hamburger icon to pop that up. What I'm actually interacting with is a modal. And so my rule of thumb is if it acts like something, I call this acts liking. If it acts like a duck, then it is a duck. Now, I've got a little bit of flack on Twitter and social media for proposing that this rule essentially. And so what I've often said is things like if a link, the difference between a link and a button is a link takes you off to another part of the page, or it takes you off to another piece of content or another page on the site. Whereas a button allows you to perform an action or interact with something on a particular page. That's the difference. That's what helps you decide whether something is a button or is a link. And the best argument I've got against that is where users will say, well, you know, I'm a screen reader user, and very often I go to this page and I'm trying to get something done and I can't get it done. Phone up support, and support says, can you see the OK button? And of course, if you think back to when I showed you how screen reader users can bring up lists of the different things that are on that page, they'll bring up the capability to look at the buttons, the form fields that are on the page, and they won't find the OK button. And that's because it's actually an OK link. And so the argument I've got is, well, it needs to be what it looks like, so that when I'm talking to support and they tell me to click a button or look for a button, I can find that button. And my argument is, no, that's not the way you should think. If you think in that way, what you're doing is trying to design your site for when users have usability problems and have to call support. And that's not what you should be thinking about when you design your site. You should be designing your application or site so that people who use it can use it without problems. And so you should provide the appropriate role that explains to the user what the use of that particular user interface widget is, so that they never have to call up support at all, because they just know how to interact with it. And so I stand by my opinion here that if it acts like a duck, it is a duck. If it acts like a button, it's a button. If it acts like a menu, it's a menu. So use that in your decisions around semantically what you're going to call things in your navigation. Then with navigation in particular, you'll often find things that are acting like more than one thing at the same time. A very common example is a drop-down menu, where you mouse over the menu with your mouse, and it'll drop down, and then you can use your mouse to select something, click on it, and it'll navigate to that particular part of the page or that particular part of the site. But when you're mousing over the menu itself, if you click that, it'll actually link off to that particular category for the site. So that menu item is actually, that drop-down menu item is acting both as a menu item and as a link. And that's what I call a turducken, a user interface turducken. It's trying to be two things at the same time. And it's very difficult for you to make that accessible, because how do you tell a keyboard-only user, how do you even provide an interaction mode for a keyboard-only user that allows them to open that menu when they get to it, say with a click, but also at the same time navigate off to the link? That's not going to work. So you could decide, well, we're going to open it automatically when the user focuses on it, and then they can tab into the menu. But now you've implemented a menu that doesn't adhere to the way ARIA authoring guidelines of the way a menu should work. And so one of the problems with not necessarily I think it's a strength, but one of the limitations of ARIA and of the accessibility APIs is that any given thing can only have one role. So it can only be either a menu item or a link. It cannot be both things at the same time. And so what you have, if you have this turducken type interaction mode, is you have a scenario where the difficulty of trying to make that accessible is exposing something that's really a usability problem. Because even as a sighted user, if I come along and I mouse over that menu item, I'm not going to necessarily think I should click on it, the top level, and that's going to take me off to that category. I might do it by mistake and discover that, but it's really not a good user interface design. And so anytime you have difficulty making something accessible, it's probably because you have a usability problem, and you should go back and rethink that. So with that in mind, let's go back and let's think of, look at that Deque site, which was the site dedicated to the knife product. So if I click on that and I go back to that, what are we looking at here? You know, at first glance, when I first visited the site, I thought, oh, this is a product-related site, and I can navigate around, I can see the options, and I can you know, find out more about the site. But as I interacted with it more, what I realized was I'm really interacting with a form. It's really a form. If I change, as I click these different user interface elements, what it's going to do is it's going to change the options, the different options for this product. And what it's really getting me to do is to try to customize the product for myself, and then click the order button and order the specific one as I've customized it here. So what I'm really interacting with is a form. That's what this is. So, so once again, that's an example of something that at first glance may look like it's, you know, just navigation, just a way to discover information about something. But when you look at it a little more closely, it's really a form. So I would expect now this information to be marked up appropriately. I would expect these things that look like radio buttons to be radio buttons. I'd expect this thing that's really a select box to be semantically marked up as a select box, and this thing that acts like an input button to be marked up as an input button. And I'd expect my keyboard interaction to work in the appropriate way with all these elements, as well as the mouse interaction, etc. Then another one of the examples we looked at was that Stellar Personal Brand Institute site. What was that? As I interacted with these little plus signs, content was popping up. So what are those semantically? My answer to that, and once again, this is based on my deducting, is that these are really links that are linking me off to different parts of the site. They're showing different pieces of content on the site. This one I'm not quite as married to, because you could also say that these are buttons, and what they're doing is popping up dialog boxes that I have to then close. I would be perfectly okay if you decided that that was semantically the way you were going to mark it up, and then make sure that everything interacted appropriately as you interacted with those buttons and the content that they exposed on the site. So once again, this is not quite as clear-cut as some of the other examples, but just by thinking through to yourself, what is this thing I'm interacting with, you're going to make it easier to make that accessible and understandable by your users. Okay, so the second category of a big category of problems that you're going to encounter when you're dealing with accessible navigation is you're going to have to deal with keyboard and screen reader interaction. And some of the common problems that you'll encounter there are no focus style and things like keyboard traps. So let's go back to that Deque site and say, okay, let's try to interact with this site using just a keyboard. You could see as I clicked around on the site, I could easily interact with it using a mouse, but let's interact with the keyboard. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tab into the page. Now, for those of you that can actually see my screen, you'll notice that I have no idea where I am. I'm probably somewhere on the page, but I can't see where I am. So that's one of the first very common problems, in particular in the any of the sites using Twitter Bootstrap or some of the more common CSS reset frameworks out there, is the first thing that disappears is the standard focus outline. And that causes a problem for a user, say a user who has Parkinson's, who can see the page but uses the keyboard to interact with it because their dexterity with the mouse is not good enough. Now, on this particular site, I have no idea where I am. So if I carry on tabbing, what you'll notice is that I get into this thing that looks kind of like maybe a little bit like an input field. There's a flashing cursor. There's an OK button next to it. There's something that says 35. Don't know what that is. But let me start typing in this and see what happens. And as I start typing, you can see that this is a customization capability for this product where I can have a custom text printed on the handle of the knife. And I've entered the text Dylan, and I can see that on the product if I'm cited. Great, excellent, this is great. So now I want to accept that option, and I tab forward. I assume that I'm on the OK button. I hit the Enter key. Oh no, what it's doing is changing my font. So that's not going to work. Okay, let me go back. I'm hitting Shift Tab. Now, all of a sudden, you'll see that my focus has gone outside outside the application and into the Chrome or the browser. So what we have here is a typical problem that you get in some of the more dynamic sites where there's custom widgets with maybe keyboard handlers of their own. Is this site has created a keyboard trap, where it's now impossible for me to get out of this and continue using the site unless I go and click either this OK button here using the mouse, or I go and click this little X at the top of the page. Once again, you've got you've got a very common problem, a keyboard trap that's been created that's really stopping me from being able to use this this application with a keyboard. So we've already seen that example of a keyboard trap. Some of the other problems you'll encounter as you're trying to create perhaps responsive, accessible navigations that work on multiple different devices is that the authoring guidelines for ARIA will tell you please use the arrow keys to navigate around things like tabs and things like menus. And if you do that, it'll work great on all the platforms except for iOS, where the arrow key events do not get delivered to ARIA, the appropriate ARIA roles when using an external Bluetooth keyboard. So now you have a dilemma. You're supposed to use a keyboard to provide interaction, but it's not going to work on iOS. Another common problem is where, in particular on responsive sites, where in one particular view, some of the content that's normally visible in the desktop view will be no longer visible on the iPhone, but that the incorrect technique is being used to hide that content, so that a screen reader or a keyboard only user interacting with the page will have to tab through all of that content, which may be off screen, and they may not be able to understand what it is that they're interacting with. So make sure that you're using the appropriate techniques to hide content like that. And then multi-device. So making sure that when you interact with, when you display your navigation on multiple different device sizes, that you can actually interact with it, both with a keyboard and with a mouse and the appropriate touch interaction, etc. So one of the things that you'll also have to deal with if you're trying to get things to work across multiple devices with a keyboard and a screen reader is making sure that that you use appropriate off-screen styles. There's different ways of hiding content appropriately visually that you want the screen reader to see, and one of those is called the clip rect. And what that really does is it keeps the content positioned behind the item that you want the user to interact with, but it really has a size of 0. And what that's useful for is on an iOS device, for example. iOS tries to identify the appropriate place to place the focus when you're interacting with interactive elements. And if something appears where something else used to be that disappeared on the screen, iOS will often, when VoiceOver is turned on, find the appropriate thing and place the focus on it. But that can also cause bugs when you use the off-screen technique where you've placed something up and to the left using, say, minus 999 M's top and left. And what will happen there is that when you swipe forward using the screen reader, it'll focus on the off-screen content, and then because something else that's focusable is in the same area that VoiceOver is highlighting, either the next swipe or that swipe that got you to the off-screen content will then take you back to the top of the page. And that can create the equivalent of that keyboard trap that we saw with that Deque and knife product site, in that I can't get past that interactive component using the DOM navigation. And then the user has to know that there's more content there, and they have to know to try to get past that by using touch to explore and finding the next piece of content after that. And that can become frustrating and can actually cause a user not to be able to find or use particular parts of the site. So make sure that using the appropriate off-screen styles when you want content to be there for the screen readers but not be visual to sighted users. There's also problems with delay on focus, setting focus for dynamic content and making that work across devices. And making sure that elements are semantically marked up so that a screen reader user can find the appropriate information very easily. And then if you've got any custom gestures on in your application, because the screen reader intercepts all the gestures that you're using to interact with the page, those custom gestures are not going to work on devices like iOS and Android when you have the screen reader turned on. And so the custom gestures then become impossible to use, and unless there's some other alternative equivalent of that, that functionality becomes inaccessible to users. So then some of those issues can be got around just by simply using good design on your page. So when I talked about the fact that arrow keys don't work to navigate around applications when using an external keyboard in iOS, and the site that I showed you earlier, the Founders Center, if we go and look at that and what that does in the responsive versions of the site. You'll notice that what happens when I'm in the desktop version, as I tab through this menu here, I can tab through and access all the different menu items. So I'm not requiring the user to use the up and down arrows to interact with this menu and get access to it. So that's it's not compliant with the ARIA guidelines for menus. But the advantage is that even if I'm using this desktop site on, say, an iPad with an external keyboard, I can use the arrow key, the tab navigation to access this. And if I'm on the smaller device like an iPhone, when I responsively change the size of this to the smaller size, when I interact with the menu itself using the appropriate keyboard interaction, then I have to refresh the page, I think. Then you'll notice that it fills up the entire page. So now I have multiple different modes of interaction that I can use to interact with this content. I can use Explore to Touch, where just by moving my finger over these things, I can find the appropriate elements on the page and double tap to open them up. Or I can use the DOM navigation, the equivalent of the keyboard navigation to find them. So I've given the user, through intelligent use of focus management and intelligent use of the screen real estate, I've given users multiple different modes to interact with it, even when they're on a device that doesn't support keyboard interaction in the way that the ARIA guidelines suggest that you do that. Okay, so what are some of the things, in addition to what I just talked about there in terms of screen real estate and keyboard interaction, that you can do to make sure that your site is going to work well across all the different types of devices? First of all, create a focus style. So go into your reset style sheet and banish outline none from that style sheet. Or that would be the easiest way of doing it, but that may create some outlines that your designers think are ugly. So if that's not acceptable to you, then there's a very simple rule of thumb that you can use, and that is to create a focus style that is the same as your hover style for the content, and to make sure that any interactive element has a hover style. And just by following that simple guideline, you can get a good-looking focus style that constantly shows the user that is using a keyboard where they are on the application. The second thing is, make sure you're maintaining your focus properly, and do things like banishing any tab index that's greater than 0, because what that'll do is it'll cause the focus order when you're using tab navigation to not match the order of the content on the page. And you may think, well, that's great, I can manage my tab indexes myself, but it's a very difficult thing to maintain. Developers tend to forget to go back in and modify those tab indexes when the page changes, and they also forget sometimes to add tab indexes, the appropriate tab indexes, when new interactive elements are on the page. And if that happens, you may find that you can tab to a particular element, and then the next element, which is added later on in the development lifecycle, which doesn't have a tab index, is not in the tab order at the appropriate point. And I then have to tab all the way through the bottom of the my positive tab indexes, back to the top of the document, and back through every other focusable element on the page to get to that next element which I would have liked to have interacted with inline. And that can make a site extremely difficult to use for somebody using a keyboard. And so the rule of thumb, the best practice is don't use tab indexes greater than 0. Use tab indexes equals to 0 if you want to make something that's not naturally tab focusable, and use tab index of -1 if you want to make something that's naturally tab focusable no longer naturally tab focusable, or if you want to create elements on the page that you can send the focus to using JavaScript. The third thing you can do is to insert the dynamic content inline. So if you saw that Founder Center website, that dynamic menu content is not only being displayed in the appropriate ways, but it's also being inserted directly after the menu item that is associated with. So that means that a screen reader user or a keyboard user can use the DOM navigation to get into and out of that menu if, excuse me, if for some reason the focus management stops working properly. Then the fourth thing, which I already mentioned, is use the clip direct off-screen technique, and that'll minimize the number of keyboard traps that you create for any off-screen content that's on the page. Get rid of all distractions. So if you have content that you've hidden visually because that's distracting, and you want iPhone users to be able to get more quickly to the most important content, use display none to hide it. Don't use any of the other techniques. Make sure you have keyboard handlers. So make sure that you have the appropriate keyboard handlers. You test for keyboard traps manually using keyboards in various different devices, and that if you have to use gestures, that you have appropriate workarounds for those gestures for your users. And then use semantic markup. So use buttons where you have button interactions. Use links when you have link type interactions. And where there are semantic gaps in HTML5, use ARIA to fill those semantic gaps. So if you have something that's a menu or a tab, there are roles that you can apply to those which allow the screen reader to read out to the screen reader user what the appropriate interface element is that the user is interacting with. So if you go to dylanb.github.io, you'll see I have a bunch of different periodic tables of the ARIA roles, and those will categorize those roles for you into the appropriate categories, allow you to kind of figure out which ones are the ones you want to use for your purposes. But also, if you click on each of the roles, it'll actually bring up the information from the standard, and allow you to use this almost as a navigation mechanism for navigating around the various different information related to the ARIA spec. So as you can see, the periodic table of ARIA roles I've got here, there's a whole bunch of new roles that allow you to create landmarks for navigating around the page. Those are what I call the document section or the document content areas. There's a bunch of roles related to form elements. There's a bunch of roles related to interactive elements. And this is really where ARIA is filling that semantic gap left by HTML5. It allows you to do things like define roles of tab panel, menus, menu bars, menu items, tooltips, sliders, etc., etc. So it really gives you a lot more semantic capabilities that HTML5 is missing. The same thing applies to ARIA attributes. These allow you to create the appropriate, communicate the appropriate values and states and names to the screen reader. So you can do things like use ARIA labeled by to provide multiple labels for a particular input element, or you can use things like ARIA hidden and ARIA invalid, ARIA expanded, ARIA disabled to convey state to the screen reader. And then you can use things like ARIA required to enhance the role. So if you have an input element and you want to say this is a required input element, by adding ARIA required equals true to that, you can enhance that role and communicate that to the user semantically. There's a bunch of different ARIA resources. I mentioned my github.io page where you can get to the ARIA attributes and ARIA roles, periodic tables. There's also the way ARIA practices, authoring practices page you can go to. And if you go to www.w3.org/WAI/intro/ARIA, you can get to a bunch of it's a jumping off point to get to a bunch of information, including the spec itself. So the third big problem you're going to have is managing focus, and I've alluded to some of the problems you're going to have here, but focus is really about ensuring that a user sees the important information on the page, ensuring the user is aware of important updates to information on the page, and ensuring that a user's point of interaction is maintained on the page. So what is important information? The screenshot I'm showing here shows the product information page on Amazon, and there's a wealth of information here. But really, if you're thinking about navigation and thinking about responsive design, you need to decide which of this information is important information so you can semantically mark that up so the user can get to that. And if you look at Amazon's responsive version of the site, you'll see that they've done that. So they've literally done a very good job of figuring that out. And so if you go through the same thought process yourself, think about what the important information is on the page. That's going to help you both in your responsive web design and how you design how that page looks on different pages, but it's also going to help you really semantically mark up the various different portions of the page. So you can see here obviously the name of the product is going to be important, the image of the product is important, the size of the product is important, but the price, the quantity, is it in stock, etc. How do I pay for the product? So those are the important things that you want to make sure are semantically marked up so a user can jump to them using a screen reader very quickly. The second thing you're going to want to do is make sure that the user is aware of updates to the page. So what I'm showing you here is Google Hangouts, and I've got a bunch of chats open, and one of those chats is highlighted in green because there's an unread message there. And so as you think about designing your page, you're going to think about a couple of things. First of all, just by using the name of the person that you're interacting with, Chris McMeeking, for example, and putting that in a heading, a screen reader user can quickly and easily get to that from where they are on the page to any conversation that they want to interact with. Second of all, by including the state inside that heading, for example, unread, you'd be able to convey to a screen reader or keyboard user which of those conversations is unread messages so they can get to those appropriately. And then through judicious use of things like sound and different changes in the foreground, background color, you can, and things like ARIA Live, you can convey that information to them. So in order to make sure that the user is aware of updates to the page and can navigate directly to the appropriate content, use state, put that state into the appropriate semantically marked up elements on the page, use structure, use sound and dark and light. So that Google Hangouts is good for somebody who can tell color apart, but it's not going to work as well for colorblind users. A better approach would be to have made the text dark and the background light and also used color at the same time. And that would have been a much more accessible way of managing that. And then use ARIA Live with caution, because you need to think about things like appropriateness, chattiness, privacy. Do I want, for example, the messages that are coming in to be read out automatically? That would be nice because I wouldn't have to navigate to the different conversations to see the content. But also it may cause problems if I'm presenting to other users if that information is automatically announced to me. Maintaining the interaction point is important because of a couple of things. First of all, if you have interruptions that occur in your application, so for example, say a timeout, a session expiration timeout pops up, you want to make sure that the user is aware of that. So if I'm a blind screen reader user, I need to make sure that is read out automatically, that my focus goes into that session expiration extension dialog so that I can dismiss it, extend my session easily. But then you also need to make sure that the interaction goes back to wherever I was so that I can carry on with whatever task I was doing when I was interrupted. So maintaining the interaction point is about making sure that I can get to the things and back to the things I was interacting with when I execute operations or actions on elements or am interrupted by things that are system driven. Another example of this is if I'm on a list of elements and I want to delete the item that I'm on. If I just click this delete button on this list of to-dos over here, what should happen to my focus? If I do nothing, different browsers and screen readers are going to do different things. Most of them will send my focus back to the top of the page. Firefox will react the appropriate way and allow me to then tab to get to the next item. But what I should do is not rely on the vagaries of the decisions made by the browser users. I should actively manage that. And so the appropriate thing to do here is when I delete this to-do item, I should really be moved to the next item in the list. If there's no next item in the list, I should be moved to the previous item in the list. if there's no previous or next item, I should go to perhaps insert a new item. And so you should think through what interaction you want and where the focus should go and manage that actively. Then if page updates are happening, as is indicated by the ubiquitous spinning icon, make sure that the appropriate thing happens once that update is completed and that the user's focus goes to the most appropriate point on the page where they need to carry on their interaction. So when navigation actions update the page, you need to make sure that users are aware of that and their interaction goes to the appropriate point. When UI components disappear, you need to make sure that the focus isn't lost, that the focus is maintained, and you need to make sure that the user has multiple ways to quickly navigate complex single-page applications or user interfaces. So use document structure, use keyboard shortcuts, and things like that to manage that. So once again, going back to that long story short web page where I clicked the hamburger icon and this dialog appeared, I should now be able to use the escape key to dismiss this dialog. I should be able to use my keyboard to navigate to the close button on the top right, and when I click that, it should take me back to the thing that opened this dialog box in the first place. Okay, I'm glad that I was able to share this with you. I'm really happy that it's Global Accessibility Awareness Day and Deque is able to provide a bunch of information. You can contact me at Dylan Barrell on Twitter, at dylan.barrell@deque.com, and if you contact me through any of those mechanisms, I'll make sure that the slides are available to you for your use after the fact. So thank you very much.